All right, we're gonna start with a sprinkle of this, dash of that. What is that, candy cane? Sure, why not? A little bit of ground pepper, a little bit more ground pepper. Gotta get some crackers in there. Oh, I love lemon. Naturally, some peanut butter. Actually, we need a lot more peanut butter. Rubber ducky? Why not? All right. Oh, God, I'm such an idiot. Forgot the wick. There we go. Here goes nothing. I know you want to try it. I know you really, really want to try it. But my advice, if it's not made for candle making, don't use it. After all, you're making a candle, not a witch's brew. So unless you are intentionally trying to cast a spell on someone, let's talk about what is okay to use in your candles, what's not okay, and what is questionable. And for what it's worth, depending on who you ask, you might get different ideas about what is safe and not safe. But for the sake of argument, these are my thoughts on what is safe and not safe to use throughout my years of candle making. In other words, there's going to be some people that disagree with some of these, and that's okay. But when making my candles, this is what I stick to. Thanks for stopping by, everyone. My name is Wade with Black Tie Barn. I would love to have you around for future videos. So if that does interest you, click subscribe below to the channel and click that little bell that will turn on notifications whenever I post new videos. Let's start with what is okay or recommended to be put in your candles. The first couple are fairly obvious, but they need to be mentioned. Like wax. Shocking. But no two waxes are the same, except for two waxes that are actually the same. Never mind. Here's a list of examples of waxes that are very common and totally acceptable to be used when making candles. Soy, paraffin, parasoys, coconuts, apricots, palms, rapeseed gel, beeswax, and then really all sorts of blends combining any number of these waxes. The only thing that turns safe waxes into unsafe waxes is improper use of those waxes. I would start with always following the recommendations of manufacturers and suppliers. There is a lot of wiggle room in a lot of these materials, so you just have to do some proper testing to figure out what's working for you. But for the most part, there's of course no issues when using wax for candle making. But note, this isn't to suggest that there's not pros and cons to each of these waxes, and certain times you may want to or not want to use some of these different waxes. That's totally up to you, that's preference. But generally speaking, it's okay to use waxes when you're making candles. Obviously. Wicks. Wicks are safe and necessary to make a candle. Proper sizing of your wick is the key and the thing that will keep that wick burning safely. There are a ton of videos on this channel that talk about wicking in general, that talk about the different types of wicks, sizing wicks, and even testing your wicks and your candles. The only unsafe wick really was lead wicks, and that's been banned for a long time now. Like everything else, there's going to be preference and different times you use different wicks, but again, they're safe to use. Fragrance oils. Now we're talking specifically about fragrance oils made for candle making. Fragrance oils themselves can be toxic and dangerous to sometimes get on your skin or in your eyes or to swallow and ingest. But we're talking about fragrance oils used in candle making, not as a beverage. Proper use of your fragrance oils is what matters. And again, follow your recommendations and usage amounts and be sure to test. We'll talk a little bit more on scents later. Candle embeds and embellishments. That's sort of a general miscellaneous term, but here's a list of some items that it's okay to add to your candles. Again, assuming you're using them properly. Candle safe crystals, gems, and rocks are a few examples of things that you can add. Shells, glass figurines, beads, and so on. Just be sure that none of these elements are going to melt, they're not flammable, and they're not toxic. But more on this category as well later. How about dyes and other colorants? Candle safe dyes made specifically for candles are, of course, safe and okay to use. That includes your liquid candle dyes, your dye chips, your dye blocks. Those are all made and designed for candle making, and they're totally fine to use. Now, you want to use the proper amount and be sure to test because they can clog your wick if you use too much. So again, broken record, but testing is key. But what about micas, powders, and glitters? Well, the simple answer is yes. If they're designed to be used for candle making, they are safe to use. Again, just like with dyes and other additives, they can cause some clogging with your wick if they're not used properly or used too much of, but generally speaking, they're safe to use. You see sort of a recurring theme here? It's all about testing, testing, testing. And then finally, there's other miscellaneous candle additives like UV inhibitor and Vibar. Those are designed and made specifically for candle making, well, other products as well, but they are fine to use in your candles. Again, all of these materials, including these additives, have recommendations on the usage. In other words, how much you should be using. That's the items that it's okay to use. I think most of those were not surprising to you. Let's talk about some of the materials and items that, at least in my opinion, are better off to avoid. Untested and unproven essential oils. Low flash points can make them more vulnerable and flammable around open flames. They can be very toxic, very unstable, and certain essential oils can be very dangerous around kids and pets. Traditional essential oils were not designed specifically for making candles. Now we're going to move on, but we're going to circle back to essential oils here shortly. All right, back to the embeds and embellishments. We're going to talk specifically about plastic embeds. Most plastics are toxic when burning, but at the very least, they're probably going to melt, and some are also flammable. So I would avoid any kind of plastic embeds if it was me. What about dried herbs and flowers? My thoughts in a nutshell on this topic is, why risk it? We're going to dive into this a little bit more here in just a minute, but even if you can make safe candles through testing with certain flowers and herbs and they're kept far away from the flame and they're on the outside, you can't control a candle and its behavior the entire time. At any point, these could still make their way towards the flame. They're going to become loose particles as the candle melts down. So again, why risk it? You're essentially adding kindling to your candle. All right, water. Water will cause all sorts of weirdness with your candles. Water and wax do not really mix, and I mean that actually literally as well. But if you've ever had a candle and you had a little bit of water hit the candle when it was burning, it will pop, it will spark. It can make your candle burn weird and completely unstable. Water can just cause all sorts of weird. Anything alcohol-based, like specifically perfumes and colognes. Now I get this question quite often from new candle makers. They have a perfume or cologne fragrance that they absolutely love, and they ask if they can use that as their scent in their candle. And I get it. As someone brand new that's never made a candle and they're just trying to understand how it works, that seems like a reasonable question. But no, you cannot use those in your candles. Most are alcohol-based or water-based, and obviously if it's alcohol-based, it's quickly turning your candle into a fire starter. If you're interested in a fragrance like that you really, really like, find an imitation candle fragrance oil meant for candles. There's imitation scents out there for pretty much everything. Food. Now, depending on the food, unsafe might be a stretch, but it's just gross. All right, on to our last category, which is where most of the questions lie, and that is the questionable area. Things that kind of lay in that gray area. Some say it's safe to use, some say it's not. Let's talk about these. Crayons, really for like coloring. Now, here's the thing about crayons. They're not really unsafe necessarily to use. Crayons these days are non-toxic, or at least most of them, I believe. The likelihood of some major safety risk is pretty low, but they're not designed for candle making, which means they're also not going to perform very well. They could easily clog your wick, and generally speaking, they just kind of stink. Just use candle dyes. And I know many candle dyes have a really potent, strong smell as well, but they're concentrated into a bottle, and by the time they mix in with your wax and candles, you generally don't smell them, unless you're probably using too much. All right, I said I would circle back to this. Let's talk about essential oils. This time, however, we're talking about essential oils made specifically for candle making. Essential oils in general, I would still just avoid, personally. But there are some that are designed, tested, and made specifically for candle making. I would still be very careful and cautious when using them, however. Adhere to the usage limits, to the guidelines, to the recommendations by the supplier. Know that they can really affect how a candle burns. Know that the actual notes and oils can actually transform as they're heated up. So the scent profile might actually entirely change as you're using it. They require thorough testing. In short, they can be okay to use if they're coming from a reliable source, you're following usage guidelines, and you thoroughly have tested them. But I still personally just avoid using them alone. All right, let's talk again about embeds. Now, I had some examples of embeds in the safe to use category, some examples of embellishments in the not so safe category, like dried flowers and herbs, for example. However, I want to come back to those specifically in this category. And the reason I also have them in the category of questionable in the gray area is because of the perception that they are used in so many candles, so they must be sort of okay to use, right? There's a ton of people using them. Well, I'm not going to give you the whole cliche, if everyone jumped off a bridge, would you? Except for I just did. But let's talk about the perspective of why sometimes they are justified to be used. One of the strongest arguments is that when using dried herbs and flowers, that they are kept on the edge away from the flame. They're kept on the outside part of the candle. I don't mean actual outside of the jar, but on the outside part of the wax. So they're not near the flame. That's great, and that will definitely lower the risk, but here's the way I look at that. If you're intentionally keeping something away from the flame, you're methodically placing them as far away as possible just to be safer, then aren't you acknowledging that there's a risk if they get near the flame? Aren't you conceding the fact that there might be some risk there? That's a red flag to me. And here's what I have seen happen in those situations. I have purchased candles. I have purchased and tested mini candles that had some dried flowers and herbs on them, and most of them did come with some separation away from the flame. They looked beautiful. I had no problems with the burn of the candle. Everything functioned properly. They looked fantastic. But what I have had happen in a couple situations is as the candle burns down, the melt pool forms, those flowers fall into the liquid melt pool and just travel, get closer and closer, closer to the wick, to the flame, and then they reharden up. And after enough times, those herbs and flowers aren't very far away from the flame anymore. And I've actually seen them go up in flames, like that, like a lighter to a newspaper. Just, I bet I've burned somewhere in the range of 25 to 40 candles that had embeds of different kinds like flowers and herbs, and the majority of them, while had me nervous, ended up fine. But I have had some that weren't and caused some safety issues. So that's the way I look at it. Statistically, that's a much higher percentage of risk than all the other candles. Now, as a candle maker, you can certainly do whatever you want to do, and you can weigh the risks how you choose to do so. But personally, I just err on the side of caution. In fact, the NCA, National Candle Association, last year even issued a warning to all candle makers to avoid using dried flowers and herbs in your candles for safety reasons, because it was causing an increase in house fires due to candles catching on fire. So I'll just leave that information with you to use how you wish. But again, it's in this gray area because there are some exceptions to this rule. For example, botanical pillar candles, which are basically pillar candles that have dried flowers sort of mashed or made into the outside of the pillar, and then the pillar burns down the center. So literally the part of the wax that has the flowers in it never melts. It never gets consumed. But those require ample testing. You have to make sure that they are made properly. And then decorative candles, of course, ones that you don't plan on lighting, which sort of goes without saying, yet I said it. And then there's like candle holders that have flowers and things on them, and you put the candle inside to burn. And technically speaking, that candle doesn't have flowers in them, but why risk it? Coffee beans. All right, another popular embellishment, and one that doesn't carry a whole ton of safety risk, which is why it's in the gray area. But they can break down, interfere with the burn, smoke, even char, and honestly, they can put off this really terrible, funky smell sometimes. But it is in the gray area because you'll get arguments on both sides, but there's nothing overly concerning about it. What about sprinkles? Another thing that you'll see quite a bit in a lot of kind of treat, dessert, birthday type candles. The problem with real sprinkles is that they're made out of pretty much nothing but sugar. And sugar turns into this really nasty, yucky, brown, smelly syrup. Ever melted down syrup on the stove, or really just melted down any kind of sugary sweet, it gets kind of, right? Which can really clog your wick, cause this really nasty, gooey mess, stink, and just give an ugly appearance to your candle. So in my opinion, it's just better to use wax sprinkles. Now, some people will take real sprinkles and stick them to the walls of the container inside with like Mod Podge or some other wax just to get them to stick. And then as the candle burns down, the sprinkles really never melt or get near the flame. And yeah, I mean, that's fine. There's no major risk there to doing that, and it's fairly common. I'd rather just use wax sprinkles made of a high melt point, like pillar wax, for example. Oh, what about the peanut butter? I have absolutely no idea if peanut butter is safe or unsafe to use. And seriously, I love peanut butter more than most things in life, but I'm not gonna put it in my candles. Again, not gonna put it in my candles again. Let me know your thoughts below in the comment section and mention anything that I may have forgotten to cover. I hope you enjoyed the video. Check out one of these two videos next, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Give this video a thumbs up if you did enjoy it. It really does help out the channel. It helps me make more and more content for all of you. So with that being said, I'll see y'all next time.